So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to tonight's HHL Expert Talk. It's actually our 8th HHL Expert Talk. First of all, I hope you've all been safe and sound and have been coping well during those rather difficult and uncertain times. So for those of you who are here for the first time tonight, what is the HHL Expert Talk and why exactly are we doing this? The HHL Expert Talk is a virtual talk series with which HHL aims to address latest key topics in research to broaden the knowledge transfer on current social, economic, and political topics led by our HHL experts. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Sigrid Fischer and I studied journalism and psychology at Indiana University in the US and continued with a master's degree in performance psychology at the University of Edinburgh in the UK, where I also worked later on in my career. At HHL, I'm now responsible for our HHL Alumni Network, and as part of this, I'm delighted to be moderating our HHL Expert Talk series. To provide you with a few facts and figures about HHL. HHL was established more than 120 years ago here in Leipzig. It is our mission to educate entrepreneurial, responsible, and effective business leaders through outstanding teaching, research, and practice. We're very proud that today we have more than 700 students within our 5 programs. And our 5 programs are the full-time and part-time MSc, the full-time and part-time MBA, as well as our full-time and part-time, our PhD program. We're proud to have more than 60 nations represented within our student body and to have more than 2,900 alumni within our network. As an entrepreneurial-minded university, we're particularly proud that more than 300 startups were founded or co-founded by HHL alumni, and 5 of these are actually unicorns. So privately held startups with a value of more than $1 billion US. We're also proud to have more than 130 partner universities across the globe. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Dr. Tobias Dauth. Professor Dauth is the Professor of International Management at Leipzig Graduate School of Management and the Academic Director of HHL Executive Education. One focus of his academic work is on top management team research and projects in the context of new work. Professor Dauth is also an Associate Professor at the Fraunhofer Center for International Management and Knowledge Economy in Leipzig. It is my pleasure to hand over to Tobias now. We will have a Q&A afterwards, and so please type in all your questions and all your thoughts into our chat box, and Tobias will answer those later. It's now my pleasure. Tobias, enjoy.
Welcome. Thanks, Sigrid, for this very kind and nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here in this 8th expert talk. And well, you see the topic, you've received the invitation, so that shouldn't be a surprise to you. We will focus on new work and what it is and how to measure it. That will be the topic for the next few minutes. I will give a presentation, but not a very lengthy one, and reserve some time for Q&A afterwards. So before we start, and Sigrid already introduced me and my background, my association to HHL, and so that's something I don't want to repeat, but I would like to start off the session and the presentation with a focus on the research that happened in the context of new work, and I just want to highlight some of the aspects that are relevant to mention here. So when it comes to publications, on the one hand, we focused for quite some time already on issues like diversity in teams, composition of teams, but also the compensation of top managers or the role of top managers with regard to digital transformation. And we also have and had some research projects that were focused on new work and related topics or parts of new work, if you want to put it like that. So the most prominent and relevant one is the cooperation we have with New Work SE on how to measure new work. Obviously, that is relevant also in today's session. We also had projects in the context of Fraunhofer and Kununu Engage on employee satisfaction, on employer branding, or on gender diversity issues and equality. So the takeaway of this slide and the introduction here is that the research and the research projects, the paper output and the research projects we do and did focuses on various aspects of new work. And now maybe it's a good point to hand over to you, at least virtually, and asking you, why are you here today? And as we don't have a very interactive session here, and I'm the one who's speaking, and later on we have chat Q&A, I just thought maybe it's nice to put some of the questions you might have on the screen here. So maybe some of you are here in this session asking themselves the questions of what is new work and what can I learn about it? What's the conceptual background and what does it actually mean? Others might say, well, I know already a little bit about new work and now it's the next one, the next step. I would like to understand how I can make jobs and work more rewarding. And maybe new work is one key that helps to do so. How can I ensure motivation and commitment of my team? So if you are in a leadership position, you ask yourself every day the question to how to commit or how to motivate and convince people of doing certain things. So how can I ensure that this is happening in a very smooth way? Maybe new work is also an aspect that needs to be considered here. Or you say, I'm focusing on employer branding and attracting people, and maybe highlighting that I'm new work oriented as a firm is one aspect that is relevant here. So these might be questions, and I try my best to address them, or at least some of them, in my discussion and in my presentation. If you want to elaborate that on that in more detail later on, I'm happy to do so also in the Q&A session. So let me start with a no-brainer. Let me put it like that. So you guys joined this session that was highlighted with how to measure new work. So I guess you are aware of the fact that there is a lot of press coverage out there in Germany, but also across the globe, so to say, that is focusing on new work and how to implement it. And here are some examples, and some are focusing on how do we implement new work in a corporate setting. Others are highlighting the fact that the way we're working is supposed to change, and there's a new work order up and coming, and we need to be prepared for that. So this new work in different facets is a very prominent topic. And here's another interesting statistics. Google search words and the interest on this term new work over the course of the last years in Germany only here. So you see that the interest on new work and the search interest is on the rise, and it really took off in, let's say, 2016, 2017. So knowing that, or being aware of the fact that new work is a very prominent topic, it's no surprise that there's also quite some research output available, or let me be more precise, that there is a quite strong and vivid debate in the practical side of things on this topic. So if we look at some of the academic sources, and here are just some examples of some good books about new work, also some journal articles that exist, one needs to highlight that the academic debate on new work is relatively new, and when it explicitly comes to journal paper output, then most of the works here are rather fragmented, so they focus on one aspect of new work and elaborate on that. And the practical literature is doing a much more comprehensive job. So new work is lively discussed, and all the various angles and facets of new work are quite prominent in this practical stream of literature. So, well, let's go one step back and ask ourselves first, what is new work, and then try to move a little bit further and go also in the direction on how to measure it. What is new work? That's a very interesting question, because there is no simple or standard or well-defined answer to that, but it's always a good idea to go back to one of the fathers, or maybe the father of new work and the new work idea, which is Friedrich Bergmann, who coined the idea or the term new work already in the 1970s and 80s. So he provides several perspectives on new work, and here I find a very interesting quote, which goes, the aim of new work is not to free people from work, so we're not getting rid of work, but to transform work so that it produces free, self-determined human beings. So something is changing with regard to the way we work, and something is changing us as people who work, and supposedly we're getting free, self-determined human beings. So that's the core idea of it. And now I'm aware of the fact that there are various facets and angles and interpretations to new work, and also Friedrich Bergmann is or constantly revisited this term and construct. So, but I guess that's a very good starting point. So something is going on with the way we work, and work is supposed to be different in the next years. So we need to go a little bit deeper and say, well, what exactly is supposed to be different? And I guess one of the key aspects that need to be mentioned here is that new work obviously centers around employees and the tasks they really want to do. So one of the key things to consider when talking about new work or when thinking about new work is that we need to place employees and their interests at the center of our attention. That sounds so trivial and so straightforward, but maybe it gets clearer later on when we talk about measurement and talking about all the different ways where new work gets tangible, that this can be a challenge. So putting employees at the center of our attention, making work inspiring. That means using digitalization, using technology in order to enable people to do what they really want to do. And maybe getting rid of stuff they don't want to do. So automation or digitalization or digital transformation of firms is in this context not always a negative thing, but it might also lead to a point where you say, well, I'm getting rid of parts of my job I don't like anyway, and I have additional time available, I have higher levels of efficiency, so I want to spend the time I've gained for things I'm really interested in. Prioritizing community means new work is also around a deeper sense of work, making or increasing self-fulfillment when going to work and when going to the office or when going to your job. So it's about working for a community, it's about working for a goal that motivates people. So why am I going to the office every Monday? What is the higher meaning of doing this? And work or new work is also about freedom. That means, and just look at the way I've highlighted this here, it's about a very individual way of working. That means it's your tasks, it's your project, it's your location and your hours. That means you have a lot of flexibility and discretion in deciding on how you want to work. And here, when it comes to location and hours, then we have already one thing to remember. It's that here we are in the home office debate. Yeah, your location, your hours. You can work flexibly from home and in your office as you wish. But new work, and that is something that gets clearer already on this slide, is much more than just flexible working hours and flexible working time, flexible location. Now, if you try to get closer to this point or to the question, how do I actually want to measure new work? Once we try to define it, yeah, then you face several challenges. On the one hand, who is actually judging whether a firm, whether a corporate is new work oriented or not? Is it the firm? Is it the employees? Or is it both? So that's something you need to discuss and decide. What exactly needs to be measured? I mean, now we have some rough idea on what new work could be, where new work could be kind of, could have an impact, but what exactly is it where we need to look for, what we need to be looking for? Well, how to evaluate the findings. So when do we say this firm is rather new work oriented and that firm is not? So where's the logic behind that one? And the fourth one, which is a very important thing from an academic's point of view, who has all the data to enable this measurement? That's another very relevant question. Well, and obviously, or no surprise, in our approach, we try to tackle these challenges and address them. At the end, what we want to do is, or what we want to achieve is some kind of new work score. That means a firm-specific score that tells corporates, well, there are some areas in which I perform quite well, in which I'm rather new work oriented, and then there are some other areas that seem to be some room for improvement. So we want to measure it, we want to quantify it. And that goes with benefits and also limitations, and we can talk about that later on. So related to that, I don't claim that what we do here is the way to measure new work or is the approach to get closer to this phenomenon, but it's one option, and we're open for feedback and also criticism in a debate here. So at the end, we want to get to this score. So in order to get there, we need to have certain areas where we assess how firms are doing and what they are doing in new work terms. So what we do is we come up with 3 dimensions of new work. We give them a name, 3 boxes. One is transparency and appreciation among employees in a firm. We look at leadership and organizational structure or organization. And we look at individual fulfillment of people who are working in firms. And now you could criticize me and say, well, but I would call these boxes in a different way based on my understanding of new work. And I'm not sure whether transparency and appreciation is the right label. And then I would say point taken, and it's absolutely fine to have different ways of interpretation and different ways of labeling things here. But the more important and the more relevant things are what is actually in these boxes and what makes or what fills transparency and appreciation with content or leadership and organization. So here we are talking about characteristics of new work, and in order to identify them, we didn't do some guesswork, but we did a literature analysis and looked at all the different, or not all, but many publications out there that are focusing on new work and that give us an idea on how to measure it. So what you see here, and this is obviously not the entire list, but what you see here is something like a common denominator that characterizes new work on a criteria level. So in other words, when you open up different types of books or different pieces of literature on new work, then you will find most of the time items and criteria that are related to new work that are similar to the ones I've mentioned over here. So it's about appreciation of people. It's about collaborating on eyes level. So reducing hierarchical structures, empowering participative leadership, ensuring that there is some collaborative work environment from an infrastructure, from a software point of view, but also from a mindset point of view. And then, of course, the more popular things like work-life integration, corporate benefits, making sure that people can combine job and private life is also a key part of new work. And of course, also this flexible work arrangements and home office issues. So what we try to do is we try to get data on these items based on employees' feedback on a certain firm, and also considering corporate feedback on the situation with regard to new work. So that means we are not directly asking, but we are using data from employees on how they rate different dimensions on new work in their specific firm. And we give corporates the chance to comment and to do some self-assessment with regard to the different dimensions of new work and send them back to us. Now, it's another point of criticism you could come up with and saying, hey, it's easy to say, I'm filling out a questionnaire. And of course, all the time I'm asked, I say, well, participative leadership, that's the thing we do, and we're very good at that. So how reliable is some kind of self-assessment? Well, we are also aware of that. So we always consider this type of data sources in combination. That's one thing. And the other aspect is if we ask for corporate feedback, we don't allow firms to just give us some answers to questions and then go away, but we ask for proof, we ask for examples, we ask for some additional data that can be found also on the website that gives us an idea on how serious this firm is actually about new work and its implementation. So we're asking for some kind of proof, and that's something we include also in our corporate survey. Now let me go into the, if you want to put it like that, machine room and how we try to come up with a model and measure it. And the slide you see now is the most colorful and complex you see in this presentation today. Let me walk you through this, and it's not as tricky as it might seem here. So at the left, you still have the new work score, and we want to come up with that, and that should be our result. And then you see still the 3 dimensions. We call them transparency, appreciation, leadership, organization, individual fulfillment. That's also no news. What's new is that we try to find very precise items like IT equipment, how old is the IT equipment people get, what type of software do people use in order to ensure collaboration? Are you familiar with Microsoft Teams, with Zoom, with Slack, with Trello, and all the other things? How do you empower people as a firm, giving them personal responsibilities, working in diverse teams, and being flexible with regard to work arrangements? So we try to measure that in these items, and the sources or the data that helps us to fill these items with content comes either from the Kununu scores of these firms. So that means employees rate their firms according to different items, or they come from the so-called Kununu Kulturkompass, where people and employees give feedback on different aspects of corporate culture, or they come from our corporate survey, and that's they come from our corporate survey, and that's how we fill also parts of our items with data. So basically, here you see how we try to break down new work dimensions into smaller bits and pieces, come up with something which is rather tangible and measurable, and then we match that with sources that are available in order to bring in an employee's perspective and a corporate perspective. Now, I don't want to focus on the method or on the conceptual framework only, but if we look into our data, and now there's this disclaimer, we don't have hundreds and thousands of firms in our to look at right now, but we have analyzed roughly 80 firms, and if we look at them, it's interesting to observe that there are different archetypes of firms that deal with new work when they implement it. And another disclaimer, obviously, there's also a bunch of firms that is not focusing on new work right now for various reasons, and I don't want to judge on that. It could be, and I don't want to say these are less performing or whatsoever. So there shouldn't be any judgment related to the archetypes I have here, and also with regard to focusing on new work or not. But if we look at the roughly 80 firms we have, what you find is a group which we call techies. So firms that say, we think we can enable new work through technology. That means we give our people the latest gadgets. Everybody has an iPad. We are well familiar with Microsoft Teams, and we are just fine with working remotely because we have the technology available. So they are really strong in infrastructure, software, and collaboration tools. What they lack is the leadership attitude towards new work, or what they sometimes lack, is the leadership attitude towards work, social cohesion, so the softer part of things, and human interaction. But if you recall one of my earlier slides, I try to make sure or clear that new work is just not Microsoft Teams or Google Docs or Trello only. It's not only technology, but technology is an enabler, but not the ultimate objective of new work. So we have quite some techies who think they can fix it with technology only. Then we have community builders who are really strong in giving their employees this sense of belongingness and corporate vision and what we are here for, and deeper sense of meaning when working. And so they're really strong in these soft factors, and they weren't asked to invest in technology in the past, but COVID has pushed them into a situation where they say, oh wow, now we have a challenge because now we need to enable our employees to work remotely. We need to do a job on the technology side of things. And that's where we see weaknesses and areas of improvement for technology and collaborative work environment. And then we have the liberals, which is a rather small group. And they say, well, you can, if you work with us, you can work where and when you want. We don't care. We don't mind whether you are sitting at home or in a coffee shop or wherever. We don't even have an office. So you are absolutely flexible with regard to your work arrangements. So definitely organizational flexibility, collaboration tools is one key asset of these firms. Again, where they struggle, where they need to catch up, where they need to improve is usually the belongingness side of things, corporate culture, so the social cohesion aspect of it. Now, the point is that none of these boxes is getting the whole job done, because new work needs to combine all of these three pillars. And that's something I wanted to highlight here. Let me, and I'm almost done here with my slide deck. Let me highlight some of these misconceptions or misunderstandings or perceptions that are around, and in my opinion are not precise enough. And one aspect, and that became clear maybe also in the previous example, new work is not technology only. That means you might be an expert in collaboration software, you have all tech savvy people in your organization. That is not doing the entire job. New work is not technology only. New work is also not home office and then I'm done. That could be an impression you get when reading all these blogs and articles out there. So in some kind of public perception, we have a very strong relationship with new work and home office. Yes, home office is a part of it, but it's not the aspect of new work. It's one central element. New work is also not no leadership. So I still have a lot to do as a corporate leader in order to implement the idea of new work, and giving people full flexibility and discretion and making leadership obsolete is, in my opinion, not the full idea of new work, but someone needs to have some guidelines that are new and updated, but still requires leaders. And well, if we try to look a little bit further and look beyond this measurement of new work, let me just add one little thing, and maybe we start with some no-brainers. In order to make new work work, you need to focus on some basics, and these basics are simple and straightforward. They are infrastructure, and I highlight that because with some of the firms we are focusing on and looking at, infrastructure still plays a critical role, and lack of sufficient IT infrastructure, and I'm also talking about bandwidth here, is still a hurdle to implement new work. So infrastructure is key. Leaders as role models for new work is also a no-brainer and a key aspect to consider. So if an organization wants to implement flexible working hours, if an organization wants to implement part-time careers and the like, then of course it's the leaders who need to signal, yes, we take this serious, and we also do that. And I don't want to repeat the flexible work arrangements and work-life integration as a basic element to make new work happen. Now, the more interesting thing is then when it comes to the advanced perspective on new work. And the point here is that many firms claim on their websites, or when we talk to corporate people, that they implement new work. But an interesting question is, what happens if new work actually takes place and is implemented successfully? And if people are empowered, if people are more motivated, if people are even more loyal and engaged, or if people have gained some extra time because their job became more efficient. So what do you do with these empowered employees, or how do you capitalize on the empowered, motivated, or more motivated people? So what's your strategy behind that in order to make new work work? That is something which is very interesting to observe, and quite interesting also to note that this is not that obvious, and we don't see so many firms that have a clear strategy on how to take new work to this next level and to this advanced approach. So with that, I'm more or less done with the content I wanted to share with you. And if you are interested in hearing more about new work and getting some German version of of me, then check out Spotify or Apple Music and New Work Stories podcast, where you have some more data or some more information. And if you are interested in the leadership aspects of leadership side of things, check out our HHL Executive Education website, where we offer some seminars, content program that is addressing this leadership task that is relevant when transforming organizations. And so we would be happy if you visit our website. So having said that, this really the last slide, and I hope you liked the short session here. And now I would stop sharing my screen and I'm ready to take your questions. Let me just...
So first of all, thank you, Tobias. Very, very insightful. And I saw there was loads of questions actually flying in. So I'm going to read them out to you bit by bit. And yeah, I hope you can answer all those questions.
I do my best.
Yeah, I know. So here's the first one. How do you say would you convince the management of the idea of new work?
Oh, there are studies out there. There's research out there about the positive impact of new work when it comes to productivity levels, motivation levels, and so on. So you could have some scientific angle to that and try to come up with these pieces of data. On the other hand, you could also say, well, we are, at least in some industries and some areas, we are fighting for talent, and we need to make sure that we are perceived as an employer which is attractive for the best talent, and new work might be an option to ensure that. So it's the data-driven and the research-driven part of it. I remember McKinsey has also published a study on the impact of new work, and I just got across that one when preparing for this talk. So there is something out there that gives you some facts and figures on the impact, and then maybe also looking at the employer attractiveness side of things. That might be another argument you might use.
Okay, perfect. Next one. The main pillars of new work, I understand, but how do you make sure that people get their stuff done, even if it's unpleasant content?
Oh, that's a good thing, a good one. Well, I don't say that new work is eliminating all the unpleasant work. That's also not the, I don't think new work is claiming that afterwards, after we've implemented new work, everything is fun and everything is great. New work aims to increase employee satisfaction and employee motivation and loyalty, but still there might be areas where people say that's just no fun to do. So I would say new work is increasing the likelihood that people are motivated and committed, but it's not the one size fits all, or it's not the killer thing to do in order to make sure that now everybody gets things done. So we shouldn't expect too much from any concept here, and so I wouldn't load this expectation to new work. But on the other hand, I mean, well, if you try to implement new work and take it really serious, then you go beyond, let's say, collaborative working environment and tools. Yeah, you go beyond technology, and you say, what do we need to do as leaders, and how does our corporate structure need to change in order to ensure that people are thinking that we address, or considering them to be addressed on eyes level, and that they are motivated and they stick to the tasks they do. So maybe it's also beyond technology, and it's an aspect where leaders have to ask themselves, what do we need to do in order to implement this idea of new work? And ultimately, this might also address this, how do I get things done, or how do I finally get things done? I'm not sure if this is hitting the spot here with regard to this question, but that's as far as I would go for now.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense, makes sense. We've got another question on how do you think you would evaluate the impact of the pandemic and working from home on the principle of new work?
Well, of course, COVID had a tremendous impact on some areas that relate to new work, and these areas are home office or remote work or collaborative software to get your job done. So for sure, the pandemic was a booster in this regard and enabled firms to think about how do I make sure that I have an online work environment. So yes, there is a huge impact of COVID and the pandemic on these areas. Still, I would say COVID is not pushing firms to implement new work automatically, but it's pushing firms to think about home office and remote work regulations, and these are part of new work. So that's how I would interpret it.
No, that makes complete sense. Thank you. The next question. Working for a community, either community equals colleagues or community equals customers?
Also good point. What usually we try to assess is both. So is there a sense of belongingness and a team spirit and high levels of collaboration in a team and within the firm, but also something related to, can you identify yourself with the services and products your firm is offering, and do you see self-fulfillment in talking of hierarchy of needs and self-fulfillment and higher order reward in your job? So we try to cover both team level, human interaction level, and for the community in general.
Yeah. Loads of questions coming in. Here's the next one. What does a high rank on new work score mean? That a company scores high in 3 dimensions? Okay, but shouldn't it be correlated or cross-checked against financial performance?
Yeah, also a good point. If you try to judge and say a firm that is implementing new work is also more successful in performance terms, then you get on slippery ground. So I don't want to do that. And the reason for that is the link between new work on the one hand and financial performance on the other hand is biased by so many other things. So you have a hard time finding out a direct effect or a direct impact of new work on, let's say, a firm's financial performance. And I bet, I don't have the data, but I bet that there are many firms out there who don't focus on new work and are performing quite well in financial terms. So we think maybe we shouldn't try to link it to financial performance, but ask more this empowerment, motivation, and loyalty questions that are centering around employees' needs. So it's not a financial performance exercise, but an exercise that tries to highlight or find out whether a firm is ready for this work environment of the future. And ultimately, this might also result in finance or financial implications. But doing this correlation or doing this analysis is something we just don't focus on right now, and I would say it would also be hard to prove here. So new work and the impact, and that relates to the first question, might rather be something where you say, how does the implementation of new work affect employee motivation? How does it affect loyalty? How does it affect employee attractiveness? That might be variables that are more directly linked to this idea and to this phenomenon. And so that's what I would focus on, and not necessarily the performance side of things. Mm-hmm. And one additional comment to the first part of your question: what does it actually mean to score high on certain dimensions? What we try to highlight and what find out is we try to find firms that are above average in these employee ratings and employee feedback on Kununu, for example. So you only get a score if you are performing above average in certain terms when it comes to IT equipment, the quality of software, and so on. So there is no clear assessment in a way that you say 1 point in this new work score is, or 2 points in the new work score are better than 1 point, or double the value of 1 point. But we try to come up with points and scores only for those who score above average in the employee feedback and also in the corporate feedback with regard to these items we are focusing on. So we try to reward or signal a reward to firms that are above standard or above average in new work dimensions.
There's actually another question on the idea of the scoring, and that is, if firms are trying to identify themselves as applying new work by achieving a certain score, what were they doing before? And what are the main changes they had to implement before they considered themselves as having this label?
Well, that would require that I know what they did before, and that's something which is out of my knowledge. I'm not sure if I fully got this question. I'm sure it's a very relevant one. But what we do is we look at the different dimensions of new work. We try to operationalize them and then see how firms perform along these different items. They might have done this also before and just get the feedback, oh wow, okay, we are doing quite well in these dimensions. Now we know. That could be one aspect. Or they see, well, I look at the standards of our IT software or the availability of collaboration tools or corporate benefits or work-life benefits we offer. And we see, well, actually, we don't have any type of flexible work arrangements in place. And so we need to do something on that, because we now have an idea on what new work could actually be. So before, maybe you don't exactly know what new work could actually be or how it could manifest itself. And now looking at these dimensions could give you an idea on where actually you need to improve. But again, I don't claim that we are the first who try to measure new work. There are also others out there who give very good and relevant ideas. But in general, a benefit of all these different models and approaches is that they try to give a better understanding of how this fuzzy thing could be more tangible.
No, that makes sense. Again, a question on how to become the best performer. Is the best performer in new work the company that fulfills as many items as possible? Or is it a specific combination that performs best in particular settings, would you say?
Oh, a very good one. First of all, and that also relates to a publication from the Bertelsmann Stiftung, there is no one-size-fits-all new work approach. And if you look at, and I mean, this becomes very clear and obvious if you look at different industries. For example, new work in a IT firm versus new work in a firm that is manufacturing things. I just had an example from Trigema and Wolfgang Grupp, who said, I need to have these workers in the office because we're manufacturing something. So home office, in our opinion, or in our setting, just doesn't work. And sure, I mean, that's a valid point. And then think of healthcare and in general, the care for elderly people, and the discussion about, can we also implement new work in order to make these jobs more rewarding, more interesting, more challenging? So you can't just say, here are the areas of new work and please tick these boxes and then you're overachiever. But this highly depends also on the industry you're in. And you can do a really good job and implement new work without explicitly addressing all the different items we are looking at. So we have firms that get very good results from their employees with regard to feedback and perception of new work status, and they don't have 5 different types of software for collaboration. I mean, so that leaves me with a hard situation to really give a precise answer on the question, and I want to avoid this "it depends" type of thing. But here it's really important to remember in which type of industry you're in, and maybe it might start with a self-assessment of the leaders in a firm, saying, now, what is new work? How can we break it down? Where do we perform really well? Where do we see some room for improvement? Let's work on that. Besides, or instead of saying, I want to fulfill and overachieve all dimensions. I guess that's not realistic and also not needed.
You actually just answered a question that I was going to pull up, and that was to what extent does the industry have to be taken in account? For example, many topics within the framework of new work depend on the industry, for example, time flexibility, but you actually just touched upon that, unless you want to say anything else on industry.
No, yes, I can say something, but I keep it short because I don't want to repeat it here. But the discussion on how can new work be implemented in various industries is a very relevant one. And of course, new work is very prominent and very easy, or relatively easy to implement in knowledge-intensive settings where people can work remotely and did so already in the past. And other firms and industries have a harder time to do that. And maybe as a firm that is manufacturing t-shirts or is producing steel, you might say, well, let's skip the home office side of things or part of things, but what's left for us where we can concentrate on in order to make this work.
Perfect. How did you actually come up with the assessment of the weaknesses?
Well, now I'm not sure whether I got the question. Assessment of the weaknesses?
I guess in the scaling.
In the scaling. I was just thinking about my slide where I said there are 3 pillars of firms and the techies, community builders, and the liberals. And there I mentioned the word weaknesses. And I was thinking about that one.
Yeah.
So if this was the question, so if you relate to the 3 pillars, the 3 types of firms we try to identify and generalize here, then of course these weaknesses are based on our analysis of these 80 firms and based on a subjective assessment of that, and that's what I wanted to highlight earlier. It's nothing which is set in stone, but we see some trends here, and we try to generalize for the sake of rather simple and straightforward arguments on this slide with the 3 pillars. Maybe that is addressing the question. So the weaknesses is a subjective assessment of the weaknesses. There is no self-assessment of the firms that also explicitly asks for weaknesses. That's just not the case. But weaknesses then arise when we say we look at employee feedback and one aspect is relatively weak, or they perform relatively low on certain aspects, and then that's where we would come up and say we consider this to be rather a weakness than a strength. I'm not sure if this tackles the question, if this is addressing the full point here, but that's how I would interpret it.
Thank you. Did you consider differences in type or rank of job of employees, as it might be limiting for new work, for example, when it comes to new technologies or working from home flexibly?
Good point. We first of all, the database and the platform Kununu is open for all the people who work in a firm, and it might ask for some information on what's your job role and what's your responsibilities. But in general, everybody can give feedback. Everybody can give feedback on some things that should be also visible to everyone in the firm. So some aspects of new work do not consider certain roles only, but should be visible and observable by everyone in the firm. But you're right, of course, flexible homework or remote work or collaborative work arrangements make sense for some job roles and don't make sense for others.
Mhm.
And we also ask for how many people actually are affected by flexible working hours or are affected by collaborative work environments to get an idea on well, how strong or how broad the base of people who actually benefit from that in a firm is. Yes, so we try to, or we ask the question, how many people can actually benefit from the stuff you tell us, yeah, in order to get a better understanding how broad the phenomenon we work in this firm is, but we don't separate between different types of job roles here.
Mhm. I want to be conscious of time. We have 7 more questions, so I'll go with the next one. How are contradicting requirements incorporated in your research? For example, I can work wherever or whenever seems to the person asking the question counterproductive to building a community and to lead effectively.
Yes. Also a good point. That relates or brings me back to the 3 pillars. So in our analysis, it's just not enough to say, I give people access to MS Teams and Zoom and then they go. But you need to perform in several areas well in order to get a recognition here. So that means you as a firm need to balance that out, or you as a leader in a firm needs to balance that out. That means we need to enable people to collaborate and work remotely, but we need to also make sure that we establish this sense of belonging and this corporate culture. So 100% online is maybe not the best idea for us, or you can work online wherever and whenever you want, and then we wonder why people don't have a sense of belongingness. That doesn't fit, or that doesn't make sense. So we have the task to find a strategy that is combining that. And in our analysis, actually, we expect that firms manage to combine that and manage to balance these contradictory things out, because we are looking for scores and performance on all these levels. And actually, that sounds rather theoretical and conceptual, but in reality and in practice, firms are doing a quite okay job in doing so. And my 3 pillars are archetypes and generalizations, but of course, some techie firms also manage to establish a strong corporate culture, or some community builders also are now well advanced with regard to collaborative software. So yes, and that's a challenge to corporate leaders.
Yeah, there's actually another question on that kind of topic, and there was some articles on the web report that more and more people tend to be overqualified for the job they're actually doing. Isn't this a contradiction to the thesis or the hypothesis that you were making that says you need more empowered and self-determined people for the new work concept?
I'm not aware of this fact and this statement that more and more people are overqualified. So that's why I have a hard time giving a very good and proper answer to that. Well, what we hear from firms is we are looking for well-trained, skilled people. We are looking for brains who bring us to the next level. How do we make sure that they feel welcome, they feel empowered? And so that is my starting point. And this person who raised this question, I would be interested to hear more about this hypothesis of people being overqualified. So we going along with that argument would mean that we don't need to invest in empowerment and making people motivated and loyal, because there are many out there and we can choose, and if people don't like it anymore, then there's enough motivated people. That's something I wouldn't say so, or I wouldn't agree with. So, but as I don't know the statement and the initial assumption here, I'm not sure whether I can get closer to that one.
Thank you. What about new office concepts? For example, co-working spaces. Does that play an essential role in successful new work?
Oh, we are looking at flexible work environment, not only in terms of working hours and working or working location, but also in a way that we are asking firms to illustrate how flexible their infrastructure and their office infrastructure actually is. So meeting rooms, separate rooms for people who want to be creative and think. Then there are some social areas. So yes, of course, this architectural side of collaboration and work plays a role, and there are firms that are specialized in interior design that is supporting new work and collaboration of people. Yes, it's certainly a part of our analysis, and certainly also an aspect that is relevant for new work. Again, I would say it's not the only, or it's not the key ingredient, and if you have a nice fancy office design, you are good to go, but it's an element of new work.
Makes sense. There's a question from an HR perspective. Bergman points out in his book, Neue Arbeit, Neue Kultur, that you need to find a job that you really, really like. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is a realistic approach?
Well, at least, isn't it nice to strive to enable something like that, or to create a work environment that is getting close to this ideal state of work? I'm realistic, and I'm not sure in diplomatic terms if we are able to satisfy all the needs and demands of everyone out there when it comes to working conditions and the like. But if a firm starts to ask, what can we do in order to make this better, mm-hmm. and in order to adjust to this new style of work, then I guess that's the most important step. And again, it's not about being over achieving here, yeah. but it's trying to get closer to it. And it's a continuous type of improvement. And maybe that's a more realistic view on Bergman's point here.
Yeah. Thank you. In your opinion, is there a benchmark company where you would say that is the new work company?
No. There could be a benchmark, and some people would say, but he says no, and I have a very good example. I don't want to call out a best practice example for a new work firm, because then others would say, hey, why didn't you mention us, or why didn't you mention me in our cooperation? So of course, if you read Handelsblatt, or if you go into Manager Magazine or Wall Street Journal or other outlets, you always have some examples that are associated with new work. And you also have examples where firms like Google were mentioned already years ago, 10 years ago, being associated with empowering people, with giving them corporate benefits, with allowing flexible work arrangements, with giving them extra time to think about new and creative projects. And so, of course, these firms have implemented new work or aspects of new work already many years ago. So this gives you an idea on what are the usual suspects here. Mm-hmm. But to be precise and to be correct, there are also many small, medium-sized firms mm-hmm. who are doing a very good job in new work, and we don't talk about them because nobody knows them. Yeah. And so it would be unfair to highlight one specific firm.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Now that we have a new work ranking, who do you expect to use the ranking, and how and what for?
Well, first of all, everybody is free to use whatever he or she thinks is necessary. Now, I would, if I were in a driver's seat in a firm, mm-hmm. then I would say I'm not necessarily focusing on what others do, or not. I'm not excessively focusing on what others do, mm-hmm. but I use this ranking in order to find out where I play or where I do a relatively good job, and where I need to improve. So I use it as a self-assessment type of thing, in order to say, last year we did the first assessment with regard to new work dimensions. this year we do it again. Where did we improve? What has changed? And maybe we then bring it in correlation, or we combine it with things like how many people have visited our website, how many people applied for a job, how many people, or what's the result in our employee satisfaction survey we do every year. Has this changed, and do we see some impact here? So that's how I would use it. I would use it as for an internal assessment. And if you wanna do some HR advertising with that, why not?
Up to the last question now.
Okay.
Are you planning on completing or doing an employee survey to match it with the data of the corporate survey? Or is Kununu the key data source?
Oh, that's a big challenge, because when we decided to do that, we faced the challenge: where do we get data? And if you want to ask the same questions to many firms out there, you need to have a standardized questionnaire, obviously. And getting to employees on a large scale with a standardized questionnaire is a challenge for data protection reasons, for privacy reasons. So there might be firms that don't accept outsiders, and we would be outsiders, to approach employees with a questionnaire. And so that's why we think Kununu is a good alternative. Of course, you can also criticize Kununu and say, hey, there's a database and there are downsides to that. But sending out a standardized questionnaire and getting data on a large scale from many firms out there is easier said than done. And so the answer is no. Mm-hmm. We don't plan to do so. Of course, for a very individual setting, you could say, I understand what new work means. I do this investigation in my own firm, but then you can't try, or you shouldn't try to compare and benchmark, because you don't have a real comparison with other firms out there. So sorry for that. No, it's not planned for data gathering reasons.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So we've come to the end of all the questions. Thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for letting us pick your brains with all those very good questions. It's been a pleasure having you. It's a virtual round of applause to you. Thank you. I hope you've had a good time as well. For everybody else out there, as we posted in the chat, all the slides and the video will be made accessible to you online. We will inform you via mail about it, so check your inbox. And you can see on the screen that our next HHL Expert Talk will be in 2 weeks' time on the Leipzig leadership model, and we hope to see you again, and also hope you've had a lovely evening with many insights from Tobias. Thank you again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.